But you're gay, I said, until you find out, Korean mafian husband said. The sharp echo of a door slamming sent Ioma's heart racing. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat as her gaze locked on Jin-ho, her new husband. He was standing in the doorway, his tall frame casting a shadow over her. The tension between them was palpable, thick with unspoken words and the weight of a marriage that had barely begun. Where the hell is he? Ioma's voice trembled as she looked around the lavish, unfamiliar penthouse. The cold metal glint of a gun still lay on the floor, where it had been dropped moments ago by the intruder. Her pulse was still hammering in her chest, and she could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, but the sight of Jin-ho only added to the chaos in her mind. You're asking about him now? Jin-ho's voice was icy, devoid of the cold edge it usually held. His eyes, dark and intense, flickered toward the weapon on the floor before meeting hers. What are you doing here? What was he trying to do to you? Ioma's throat tightened. He had a gun. He could have, she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. But Jin-ho didn't seem to care about her fears. His focus was elsewhere, his expression hardening into something unfamiliar, a look she'd never seen before. Jin-ho moved quickly, his powerful body crossing the room in long, confident strides. He crouched next to the intruder, still unconscious on the floor, and a strange calmness filled the space between them. You should have stayed out of my business, Jin-ho muttered to the fallen man, then shifted his gaze back to Ioma. Are you hurt? He asked, his tone suddenly soft but carrying an urgency she couldn't ignore. For a moment, Ioma stood there, frozen. His question hung in the air like a confession, and something about it made her feel exposed. She shook her head slowly. No, I'm fine, she whispered, her heart still racing as she processed the events that had just unfolded. The fear from moments ago was still fresh in her mind, but it was quickly overshadowed by the confusion swirling inside her. Jin-ho didn't speak for a moment. He simply stared at her, his jaw tight. When he finally spoke again, his voice was firm, almost possessive. You're mine now. No one touches you. No one. The words were blunt, and yet they carried a weight, a promise that felt both frightening and comforting. Ioma felt a chill run through her, and she took a hesitant step back. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. This wasn't the life she had imagined when she agreed to this marriage. Everything had been so calculated, so planned, and now? Now, she didn't know what to think. She'd heard the rumors. Heard how everyone said Jin-ho was cold, emotionless, incapable of caring for anyone. He was the leader of the most dangerous Korean mafia family in Seoul, and she was just a pawn in his game. He didn't want her, not really. He needed her for appearances. They both knew that. You don't have to do this, Ioma said, her voice shaking with a mix of frustration and fear. You don't have to pretend. She looked away from him, unable to meet his gaze any longer. I'm just a cover for your reputation. That's all. Jin-ho didn't respond at first. His silence was almost worse than anything he could have said. When he did speak, his voice was low, rough. I never asked for this, either. But I'll protect you, even if it means doing something I didn't want to do. If you think I'll let some asshole walk into my home and threaten you, you're wrong. Ioma turned back to face him, her eyes wide. You're just doing your job, right? The words felt like they had been forced out of her mouth, but she couldn't stop them. She had to know, even if she was afraid of the answer. Jin-ho's eyes locked with hers, and in that moment, she saw something raw, something real. His usual cold, controlled demeanor had cracked, just slightly, and she was standing there, witnessing it. If that's what you want to believe, then fine. But don't mistake this for anything else. He stepped closer, and Ioma's breath hitched as he towered over her. You're safe. I won't let anyone harm you. And if you think for a second that I don't care, you're wrong. She couldn't breathe. He was too close, too intense. But she could see it in his eyes. He was telling the truth, in his own way. Despite everything, despite the rumors, the distance, the cold walls he built around himself, he cared about her safety. And it was terrifying to realize that. Before she could respond, the sound of police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Jin-ho straightened, his cold mask slipping back into place. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice clipped. "I'll handle this." But just before he turned to deal with the authorities, he paused. "Don't go anywhere," he added, his tone strangely softer. Ioma watched him walk away, her thoughts racing. What was happening? What was this? She didn't know how to feel about him. She didn't know how to feel about any of it. But as the sound of his footsteps faded, she couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more to this arrangement than she had ever imagined. As the police arrived and took control of the situation, Ioma sank into a chair, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion she hadn't realized she'd been holding back. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, her hands shaking as she saw the message. "Stay with him. He's not what you think he is." The message was from her best friend, Amina, but Ioma didn't know what to make of it. Could it be true? Could Jin-ho, the man everyone said was untouchable, actually care for her? Was it possible that their marriage, born of obligation and deceit, could turn into something more? Ioma didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. The story she was living wasn't over. It had only just begun. Ioma sat in the cold silence of the penthouse, her mind whirling with confusion. The police had left after taking their statements, and Jin-ho had retreated into the background, his demeanor shifting once again to the familiar, impenetrable coldness she had seen in him since their first meeting. The man who had rushed to her side like a fierce protector was now a stranger again, distant and unreadable. She stood up, her body still aching from the tension of the night. Her hands trembled as she tried to process everything that had happened. The gun, the intruder, the way Jin-ho had fought like a man possessed, his fierce protection for her. Could he really be the monster everyone had made him out to be? Or was he, like her, trapped in something much bigger than either of them? She shook her head, feeling a deep sense of isolation. "This is crazy," she muttered under her breath, pacing the length of the luxurious, sterile apartment. She wasn't supposed to feel anything for him, not after what her parents had forced her into. She walked over to the window, her eyes tracing the lights of the city below. The world outside seemed so far away, so foreign to her now. She hadn't wanted this life. She hadn't wanted any of it. But the money, the security, it was what had been offered to her in exchange for her freedom. But now, as she stood here, alone in a foreign city, she felt more lost than ever. "Why did you do it?" She whispered aloud, though she wasn't sure who she was asking, the man she had just married, or herself. Suddenly, the soft sound of footsteps behind her made her freeze. She turned around to find Jin-ho standing in the doorway. His dark eyes were unreadable, his jaw tight, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his tailored suit. He looked like the same cold man she had met weeks ago, the Mafia boss who didn't need anyone, least of all her. "Are you going to stare at the city all night?" he asked, his voice flat but carrying an undercurrent of something that was harder to place. Ioma took a deep breath, her heart beating faster as she tried to steady herself. "I'm just trying to understand all of this." She waved a hand around the penthouse, the opulence, the coldness. "You know, the gun, the rumors, the deal. Why did you even agree to this?" Jin-ho's gaze softened, but only slightly. He stepped closer, his presence almost suffocating. "You think I wanted this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, a hint of something vulnerable there that surprised her. "You think I wanted to marry a stranger? Then why did you?" Ioma asked, her voice trembling despite herself. She needed answers. She needed to understand. This wasn't the life she had imagined. This wasn't what she'd been promised. Jin-ho didn't answer immediately. He stared at her, his eyes scanning her face as if searching for something. "Because I was needed." The words were heavy with meaning, and it was clear that they meant more than she could comprehend. Ioma frowned, trying to make sense of his cryptic response. Needed? For what? He stepped closer, his proximity making her heart race. In my position, I can't afford mistakes. I can't afford vulnerability. Marrying you, it was the easiest way to stop the rumors. To protect my family's reputation. To protect my company. His voice was calm, controlled, but his eyes told a different story. There was something else there, something raw. You don't know how to love, do you? Ioma asked, her voice coming out softer than she intended, the question hanging in the air between them. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. Jin-ho froze. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, Ioma thought he might walk away. But instead, he let out a deep breath, his shoulders slumping just a little. No, he said quietly, the truth in his words weighing heavily on both of them. I don't. She stared at him, her heart racing in a way she couldn't explain. Here was the man she had married, a man everyone feared and whispered about, and yet, in that moment, he was just like her, lost, uncertain, unsure of what came next. And somehow, in that shared vulnerability, something between them shifted. You don't have to be perfect, Ioma said softly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. You don't have to be anything but real. Jin-ho looked at her, his eyes narrowing as if he were trying to figure her out. Real? He asked, a faint glimmer of curiosity in his voice. Yeah, Ioma nodded. No one's perfect. But pretending we're something we're not, it won't work for either of us. There was a long silence. Jin-ho didn't move, didn't speak, but his expression softened ever so slightly. Ioma felt a strange flutter in her chest. Was this the beginning of something real, or was it just another act in the game they were both playing? You're not what I expected, Jin-ho said finally, his voice surprisingly soft. But then again, neither am I. Ioma didn't know what to say. There was so much more she wanted to ask, but the weight of everything that had happened, of the violence, the lies, the loneliness, seemed to settle between them. Jin-ho stepped back, his eyes never leaving hers. We're not done here, he said, his tone hardening again, as if the vulnerability had never existed. We have to play the part for the world. But I won't let anything happen to you. Ioma swallowed, her heart pounding in her chest. I don't need protecting, she said quickly, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. He raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. Everyone needs protection. And right now, you need me. His words were final, no room for argument. Before she could respond, he turned and walked toward the door, leaving Ioma standing there, her mind a storm of confusion and uncertainty. But one thing was clear, nothing in her life would ever be the same. What do you think? Will Ioma and Jin-ho's relationship become real, or will it always be an arrangement? Drop a comment below and let me know. If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. Believe me, you won't want to miss it. The next few days passed in a blur of icy formality. Ioma woke each morning in the penthouse to the harsh reality of her new life, surrounded by the emptiness of luxury that only served to highlight her isolation. Jin-ho kept his distance, as expected. He worked long hours, rarely coming home before midnight. And when he did, he was distant. His eyes haunted, his demeanor cold and professional, as though they were still strangers forced into the same space. She, too, had settled into a rhythm of survival, learning to navigate the cold world around her. She attended language lessons, her focus split between Korean vocabulary and the oppressive silence that filled the space between her and her husband. She knew he was trying to maintain the appearance of the perfect marriage, a marriage he couldn't seem to care about. But the cracks were showing. It had been a week since the break-in, and still, Ioma couldn't shake the image of Jin-ho's face when he'd rushed into the room. The fear, the determination, the fierce need to protect her. That moment had burned itself into her memory, and she found herself thinking about it more than she wanted to admit. She was still angry, angry at her parents, angry at Jin-ho, angry at herself. She had been sold, her life exchanged for the sake of a business deal, her dreams buried beneath the weight of obligation. Yet, in the moments when Jin-ho looked at her, even if only for a second, there was something in his eyes. Something she hadn't expected to see. Something real. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. She looked up, startled, to find Jin-ho standing in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, his eyes cold as ever, but his posture was different. Less rigid. For the first time in days, he wasn't dressed in a suit. He wore dark jeans and a simple shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing the tattoos on his forearms. It was a stark contrast to the businessman she had come to know. "Dinner's ready," he said, his voice flat but with a hint of something she couldn't place. "Dinner?" Ioma raised an eyebrow. "I thought you were working late again." Jin-ho stepped inside, glancing briefly at her before his eyes flickered away. "I decided to come home early tonight." Ioma stood from the couch, her feet hesitant against the cool marble floor. "I didn't expect you to actually eat dinner with me." He paused, his gaze locking with hers. "I'm not your enemy, Ioma." Her heart skipped a beat at the way he said her name, soft, almost gentle, but tinged with something else. She crossed her arms, trying to regain some control. "You don't have to pretend. We both know why we're here. Why we're married." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, Ioma saw a flicker of something that could almost be frustration. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. "You're right," he said, his voice low. "We didn't get married for love. But I'm trying, Ioma. I'm trying to do more than just play a role." Ioma's heart clenched. "What does that even mean?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "You're trying to be a good husband now? After everything?" Jin-ho's eyes narrowed. "I never said I was good at this," he said. "But I don't want to be just a business partner to you. I'm not asking for your love, Ioma. I'm just asking for you to see me for what I am. To stop pretending I'm the monster everyone says I am." Ioma stared at him, her mind racing. This wasn't what she had expected. She had thought this marriage would be a cold, businesslike affair. She had thought she could keep her distance, keep her heart guarded. But now, with his words hanging in the air between them, she felt something shift. Something unfamiliar. She couldn't bring herself to speak, so instead, she turned and walked toward the dining table. "If you want dinner, then sit down. I'm not going to keep asking." For the first time in what felt like forever, Jin-ho smiled. A small, almost imperceptible curve of his lips. It was enough to stop Ioma in her tracks. She wasn't sure what it meant, but the smile made her heart skip a beat. As they sat down at the table, the tension between them was thick, but it wasn't the same kind of cold, calculated tension they had shared before. It was different now. Neither of them knew what to say, but there was a strange kind of understanding in the air, a silent agreement to stop pretending. They ate in silence for a while, the clinking of cutlery the only sound in the room. But eventually, Jin-ho broke the quiet. "You're not like the others," he said, his voice soft. "The ones who are just here for the money or the fame. You actually care about what's real." Ioma raised an eyebrow. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "It's the truth," he said simply, meeting her gaze. "You don't care about my reputation. You care about me. And it's more than I expected." Ioma's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't sure what to say, how to respond. This wasn't how she had imagined their marriage. She had thought it would be a cold, transactional affair, and instead, she was sitting here, with him, feeling like she was starting to see a side of him she never knew existed. "I'm not asking for anything, Ioma," Jin-ho continued, his voice steady. "I'm just trying to show you that I'm not what everyone says I am. That I can be something more. For you. Ioma took a deep breath, her eyes not leaving his. And why would you do that? Why bother? Because. Jin-ho hesitated, then took a long breath. Because I don't want to lose you. Even if you think this marriage is a mistake, even if you want to leave, I want you to know that I've never been more serious about anything in my life. The words hung in the air, and Ioma felt her chest tighten. She wasn't ready to fall for him, not yet, not like this. But she couldn't deny the pull she felt, the tiny crack in her own defenses. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor. I can't do this, she whispered, turning away from him. I can't pretend like everything's fine when it's not. Jin-ho stood too, moving quickly to her side. I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm just asking you to stay. His voice was low, intense. Stay with me, Ioma. Give this a chance. Let me prove to you that I'm more than just the man everyone thinks I am. Ioma's heart raced, her mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. She didn't know what to do, didn't know what to say. But one thing was clear, this marriage, this impossible arrangement, was no longer just about survival. It was about something much more complicated. Something neither of them had expected. The next few days felt like a whirlwind for Ioma. She couldn't escape the memory of that night. The way Jin-ho had looked at her, the rawness in his voice when he said he wanted more than just a business arrangement. His words haunted her, followed her through each day like a shadow. She wanted to push them away, to bury the feelings that were slowly creeping up on her. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't ignore the way her heart beat faster every time she saw him. She had spent the past few days in a haze, her thoughts fragmented between the truth she was trying to deny and the parts of herself she'd been forced to hide. Despite the growing connection between them, Ioma knew one thing for sure, she couldn't let herself fall for him. Not again. Not like this. It was late afternoon when Jin-ho finally returned from another one of his endless meetings. She was in the kitchen, attempting to prepare dinner for herself, though her hands were shaking as she stirred the ingredients in the pot. The silence between them had grown unbearable. Every time they passed each other, their eyes would meet, but neither of them knew what to say anymore. He had tried to reach her, to connect, but Ioma wasn't ready to give him any more of herself. She couldn't. But that evening, something was different. He walked into the kitchen, his usual business suit replaced by a simple black shirt and jeans. His hair, usually perfectly styled, was slightly disheveled, as if he had just come from a long day. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there watching her. Ioma felt the weight of his gaze on her back. She swallowed hard, trying to keep her emotions in check. I'm making dinner, she said, her voice flat, betraying none of the turmoil inside her. You don't have to stay. I'm not staying, Jin-ho replied quietly, his voice unexpectedly soft. But I am here. With you. Ioma's heart skipped a beat. She didn't want to admit it, but the sound of his voice, so vulnerable, sent a wave of heat through her chest. She turned slightly, meeting his eyes for the first time that evening. He was standing close, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his expression unreadable. Why? She asked, her voice small. Why do you care so much? I'm not some project you can fix, Jin-ho. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. Because I can't stop caring, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought I could. I thought this would just be an arrangement, a way to fix things. But it's more than that now. I've made it more than that. And I'm not sorry for it. Ioma felt a rush of emotions surge inside her, anger, confusion, and something else she couldn't name. I don't know what you want from me, she muttered, looking away from him. I'm not going to fall in love with you, Jin-ho. I can't. I can't even trust you. His expression hardened for a moment, but then, just as quickly, it softened. He reached out, his hand brushing her arm lightly, sending a shock of warmth through her body. I'm not asking you to love me, he said. I'm asking you to see me. To see me for who I am, not just who everyone says I am. I'm asking you to give me a chance. The words hung in the air, and Ioma couldn't breathe. This wasn't what she had planned. She had promised herself she wouldn't get caught up in this, that she wouldn't let him break down the walls she had spent so long building. But every word he spoke, every glance, every moment of tenderness, was breaking those walls down, piece by piece. She pulled away, stepping back from him. You don't get it, she said, her voice trembling with frustration. You don't understand what I've been through. I didn't ask for this life, Jin-ho. I didn't ask for any of it. You. She cut herself off, feeling the weight of her words as they crashed down on her. Jin-ho didn't say anything for a long time. He simply watched her, his gaze steady and patient. When he finally spoke, it was in the same quiet tone that had become almost familiar to her. I don't understand, you're right. But I'm trying to. Every day, I'm trying to understand you, to understand what you need, what you want. And I'm not going to stop until I figure it out. Ioma looked up at him, her heart racing. She was torn between wanting to push him away and wanting to give in to the connection that was pulling her toward him. But she couldn't let herself, she wouldn't. Why? She asked again, her voice barely a whisper. Why me, Jin-ho? He took a deep breath, his eyes searching hers, as if weighing his next words carefully. Because you're the only one who's ever made me feel something real. You're the only one who hasn't treated me like a monster or a machine. You see me, Ioma. Really see me. And that's something I didn't think I deserved. The sincerity in his voice struck her, like a punch to the gut. She had heard the rumors, the whispers about him, the ruthless mafia boss with no heart, no soul. But in that moment, standing in front of her, he was just a man. A man who was hurting, just like her. I don't know how to do this, she confessed, her voice breaking. I don't know how to trust you. How to trust anyone. You don't have to trust me yet, Jin-ho said softly. You just have to let me prove that I'm worth it. Let me show you who I really am. Ioma swallowed hard, the words lodged in her throat. She didn't know what to do with the feelings stirring inside her. She had promised herself she wouldn't let anyone in, but Jin-ho was breaking through her defenses one moment at a time. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, her mind racing. Could she trust him? Could she really give him a chance, even if she was scared of what might happen? She turned back to him, her heart pounding in her chest. I'm not ready to love you, she said, her voice soft but firm. But I'll try. I'll try to understand you, Jin-ho. I'll try to give us a chance. Jin-ho's eyes softened, a quiet relief washing over his face. That's all I can ask for. What do you think? Can Ioma truly open her heart to Jin-ho, or is she just setting herself up for more pain? Drop a comment below and let me know. If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, things are about to get even more intense. The following weeks were a confusing blur for Ioma. Every day seemed to be a battle. Between the growing connection she felt toward Jin-ho and the walls she had built up to protect herself from the pain of losing everything. She kept her distance, as much as she could, but Jin-ho's persistence wore at her, slowly breaking through the carefully constructed walls around her heart. She hadn't expected to see this side of him. His business persona was cold, ruthless, but behind that facade, there was something else. Something that made her question everything she thought she knew about him. She had tried to keep her emotions in check, but they were slipping through the cracks, just as he had slipped into her life. It was late one evening when Ioma found herself standing by the window, staring out at the glittering skyline of Seoul. The city seemed so vast, so full of possibilities, and yet she felt trapped in her gilded cage. The sound of the door opening caught her attention, and she turned, her breath catching when she saw Jin-ho walking toward her. It had been a long day for him, she could tell. His shoulders were tense, his expression darkened by the weight of his responsibilities. But tonight, something felt different. I didn't expect you to still be up, he said, his voice low, as he stopped just a few feet away from her. Ioma turned her gaze back to the city, her fingers curling around the edge of the windowsill. I couldn't sleep, she admitted quietly. Too much on my mind. There was a long pause. Jin-ho didn't speak immediately, his eyes scanning her profile before he finally took a step closer. Talk to me, he said, his voice soft but insistent. Whatever it is, you don't have to go through it alone. Ioma let out a breath, her chest tightening. She hadn't allowed herself to think too much about her situation lately. She had been too caught up in the whirlwind of Jin-ho's presence, in the way he made her feel both scared and alive. But now, standing here with him, the weight of her reality was undeniable. I can't keep doing this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I keep pretending that this is normal. That this is what I wanted, that I can just be okay with it. But I'm not. I'm scared, Jin-ho. Jin-ho's expression softened, and without saying another word, he stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. The gesture was small, but it sent a wave of warmth through her. For a moment, she wanted to pull away. To keep herself safe. But she didn't. You don't have to pretend, he said, his voice steady but full of understanding. I'm not asking you to be okay with this. I'm asking you to be real with me. I'm asking you to trust me, even just a little. Ioma shook her head, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. I don't know how to trust you, she admitted, her voice breaking. I don't know how to trust anyone, especially after everything that's happened. Jin-ho's face softened even more, and he stepped closer, closing the space between them. His hand gently cupped her chin, tilting her face toward his. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a brief moment, there was no business, no mafia, no cold facade. There was just him, and there was just her. I'm not asking for blind trust, he said quietly. I'm asking for a chance to show you that I can be what you need. That I'm not just a man of power and reputation. I'm a man who's willing to try, willing to fight for you, even when you don't think you need anyone to fight for you. Ioma stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. His words, so genuine, so vulnerable, pierced through the layers of her defenses. She had never seen him like this. He wasn't the man she had heard about in whispers or the man who had signed a contract to marry her for appearances. He was someone different, someone real. And that scared her more than anything. I'm scared too, Ioma, Jin-ho continued, his thumb gently brushing her cheek. I've never let anyone in. I've never trusted anyone enough to let them see who I really am. But you've made me want to try. And I can't keep pretending I don't feel anything. The words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Ioma swallowed hard, the reality of their situation crashing down on her. This wasn't just some business arrangement anymore. This wasn't just about appearances or surviving. There was something real between them now, something neither of them had expected. You don't have to do this, she whispered, looking down at his hand still resting on her cheek. You don't have to change for me. Jin-ho's grip on her chin tightened slightly, lifting her face back up to meet his gaze. I'm not changing for you, he said softly. I'm changing because I want to. Because for the first time in my life, I want something real. And that's you, Ioma. She felt the tears she had been holding back start to fall, one by one. She didn't know what this meant, what it meant for them, for their marriage, for their future. But in that moment, standing in front of him, she couldn't deny that something between them had shifted. Something powerful. Jin-ho didn't speak. Instead, he leaned in slowly, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was tentative at first, as if he were waiting for her to pull away. But she didn't. She didn't pull away. Instead, she kissed him back, her heart pounding in her chest as everything that had been left unsaid between them finally came to the surface. When they broke apart, their faces were close, their breaths mingling in the space between them. Ioma couldn't find the words, but Jin-ho seemed to understand. You don't have to decide everything right now, he whispered. Take your time. We'll figure this out. Together. And for the first time since she'd come to Seoul, Ioma allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could let go of her fear. Maybe, just maybe, she could trust Jin-ho. The next morning, Ioma woke to an unfamiliar sense of quiet. The tension in the penthouse had shifted overnight, almost imperceptibly, but it was there. She could feel it in the air, like something had changed between her and Jin-ho. She had expected everything to feel even more distant, more complicated after the kiss, but it didn't. Instead, the distance had closed, leaving her with a strange mix of hope and uncertainty. She stood up, stretching her limbs and walking to the window. The skyline of Seoul stretched out before her, the city both beautiful and overwhelming. She felt small in comparison to it, yet at the same time, there was something freeing about being here, living a life that, despite how it started, was now slowly becoming her own. Ioma took a deep breath, trying to shake off the thoughts clouding her mind. She couldn't afford to think too much about what Jin-ho had said, about what had happened between them. She wasn't ready to face it yet. But then again, hadn't she been running from everything her whole life? From her family's expectations, from the life they wanted for her, from the marriage she had never asked for? Maybe it was time to stop running. She hadn't made any decisions, not yet, but something was tugging at her. Something told her that maybe, just maybe, Jin-ho was right. Maybe they could figure this out together. She heard a knock on the door before it creaked open, interrupting her thoughts. Jin-ho stepped in, his usual business attire replaced by a casual black shirt and dark jeans. His presence, commanding as always, filled the room. "Morning," he said quietly, his gaze studying her as if he were searching for any sign of how last night had affected her. "Morning," Ioma replied, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions swirling in her chest. They stood there for a moment, the air thick with unspoken words. Jin-ho broke the silence first, his voice unusually soft. "I'm leaving for a meeting in an hour. I wanted to check in on you before I go." Ioma nodded, unsure of what to say. The vulnerability she had shown the night before felt like a lifetime ago, but the weight of it still lingered. She wasn't sure where they stood now, or where they were going, but one thing was clear, everything had changed. She couldn't deny that. "I'm fine," she said after a moment. "I'm getting used to the schedule here. The lessons, the meals, the silence." She let out a bitter laugh. "I'm just trying to find my place." Jin-ho's expression softened as he moved closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "You're not just a guest here, Ioma. This is your home now. I want you to feel like it is. You don't have to be alone." Ioma swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. His words were simple, but the sincerity in his voice hit her in a way she hadn't expected. He was offering her something she hadn't even known she needed. "I'm not used to being here," she admitted, her voice quiet. "Not really. This place is, it's not what I imagined." She paused, trying to find the right words. "I didn't expect to be this lost. I didn't expect to be so disconnected." "You're not disconnected," Jin-ho said, his voice firm. "You just need time. We both do." Ioma looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. "And what if I don't have time?" she asked, her voice trembling despite herself. "What if I can't make this work? What if I can't trust you like I need to?" Jin-ho reached out, gently taking her hand in his. The gesture was simple, but it spoke volumes. He didn't speak at first, letting her words hang in the air, but when he finally did, his voice was low, steady, and filled with a quiet certainty. "I'll give you all the time you need," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I won't rush you. But if you're willing to try, I'll be here. Every step of the way." Ioma's heart raced as his words sank in. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this, ready for him, ready for the vulnerability and the connection that were building between them. But in that moment, she realized something. Maybe it wasn't about being ready. Maybe it was about taking the leap, about trusting herself enough to step forward, even when the future was uncertain. She let out a breath, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement stir inside her. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered, almost to herself. But I want to try. Jin-ho gave her a small smile, the first genuine smile she had seen from him in days. That's all I'm asking for. Before she could respond, there was a soft chime from her phone, interrupting the moment. Jin-ho glanced at it before she could pick it up. It's my assistant, he said, his tone returning to his usual businesslike manner. I need to take this. He dropped her hand reluctantly, his eyes lingering on her for just a second longer than usual before he turned and walked toward the door. I'll be back soon, he said over his shoulder. You're not alone in this, Ioma. And with that, he was gone, leaving Ioma standing there, a swirl of emotions inside her chest. She wasn't sure what this meant. She wasn't sure where this was all heading. But one thing was clear, she was no longer just a pawn in a game. She was something more. And for the first time in a long while, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope. The following days seemed to drag on, each one blending into the next. Ioma spent most of her time reflecting, turning over the events of the past few weeks in her mind. Jin-ho's words, his actions, the moments they had shared, they all seemed to weigh heavily on her. She wasn't used to feeling so vulnerable, so open to someone else's presence. Yet here she was, caught between the life she had planned and the life she was being slowly drawn into. Her life had been so carefully controlled, so tightly wound. But now, with Jin-ho in the picture, nothing felt certain anymore. It wasn't just the marriage, the contract, the arrangement, it was him. Jin-ho was slowly unraveling the walls she had built around herself, and the more she tried to hold back, the more she realized she didn't want to. She didn't want to shut herself off anymore. But could she trust him? Could she trust herself enough to let him in? Ioma stood in the living room of the penthouse, looking out at the city as she absent-mindedly traced her fingers across the glass. It was late, and the soft glow of the lights below seemed to mirror the turmoil inside her. She was just about to retreat to her room when she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. You're still up, Jin-ho's voice came from the door, a hint of surprise in his tone. Ioma turned, her eyes meeting his. I couldn't sleep, she admitted, though she wasn't sure if it was the unease in her heart or the growing pull she felt toward him that kept her awake. Jin-ho stepped further into the room, his usual composed demeanor slipping just slightly as he glanced at her, concern flickering in his gaze. You've been distant lately, he said, his voice quiet but full of meaning. I want to know what's going on in your head, Ioma. What you're thinking. Because I know you're not the type to sit in silence when something's bothering you. She could feel his eyes on her, searching, probing. The weight of his gaze made her heart race. She had spent so much time running from him, but here he was, asking her to stop hiding, to stop pretending. I'm just confused, Ioma said, her voice soft. I don't know what this is. What we are. We've both been pretending for so long, Jin-ho. Pretending this is just a business arrangement, that we're just going through the motions. But I can't pretend anymore. Jin-ho didn't speak immediately, letting her words hang in the air between them. When he did respond, his voice was low, almost tender. I'm not pretending, he said. Not anymore. I've told you, Ioma. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And I'm not going to let you go through this alone. We're in this together. Ioma felt a lump form in her throat at his words. She wanted to believe him, she wanted to trust that this wasn't just another one of his well-rehearsed lines. But something inside her held her back, a deep-rooted fear that had taken root long before she'd met him. The fear of getting too close, of letting someone in only to be hurt. Why? She asked, her voice shaky. Why are you doing this? Why are you trying so hard? You didn't have to. This was just supposed to be a deal. A way to fix things. Jin-ho stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. Because somewhere along the way, I realized that I don't want to live like that anymore. I don't want to keep running from what I feel, from what this could be. His eyes softened, and for the first time, Ioma saw the vulnerability he had hidden so well. I'm not asking you to fall in love with me right away. I'm not asking you to forgive me for everything, for the way things started. But I'm asking you to trust me. To trust that I'm not just playing some game. I want something real, Ioma. And I want that with you. She looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. Could she really do this? Could she let go of her fear and allow herself to feel something for him? To trust him? Ioma took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling in her chest. I don't know if I can, she whispered. I don't know if I can trust you. Not fully. Jin-ho's expression shifted, his eyes hardening for a brief moment before softening again. He didn't pull away, though. He didn't retreat like he had before. Then let me prove it to you. Every day, I'll show you. And if you still don't trust me by the end of it, I'll walk away. But you'll know that I tried. Ioma's breath hitched at his words. He was serious. Dead serious. And it was in that moment, standing in front of him, that she realized something. She wasn't just scared of getting hurt. She was scared of what could happen if she let him in, if she allowed herself to feel something for him. What would that mean for her life, for the future she had imagined? But deep down, she knew. She couldn't keep hiding from this. She couldn't keep pretending that she didn't care about him. She had to let herself feel, even if it meant taking a risk. I'm not promising anything, Ioma said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I'll try. I'll try to trust you, Jin-ho. A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. That's all I'm asking for. The tension that had been building between them seemed to dissolve in that moment, leaving only the quiet hum of the city outside and the unspoken understanding between them. Ioma didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she was ready to fully embrace what was happening between them. But for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. Jin-ho stepped closer, his hand gently brushing against hers. We'll figure this out together, he said, his voice full of quiet conviction. And in that moment, despite all the fear and uncertainty, Ioma allowed herself to believe him. What do you think? Will Ioma finally let herself trust Jin-ho, or will she pull away again? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next part. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The days following their conversation were filled with a strange mix of anticipation and uncertainty. Ioma couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between her and Jin-ho. There was a quiet understanding now, an unspoken bond that neither of them had been ready to admit, but both could feel. Despite the growing closeness, the fear she'd carried for so long still lingered, threatening to undo everything. Jin-ho continued to show up for her in ways she hadn't expected. He was there, really there, when she needed him, whether it was over dinner or late into the night when she couldn't sleep. He'd sit with her, talk with her, even laugh with her, and each time he did, Ioma felt herself softening, her walls slowly coming down. But the fear still remained. It had always remained. One evening, just a week after their last conversation, they sat on the balcony together, the city lights shimmering below them like a blanket of stars. Jin-ho had just come back from a long day of meetings, his suit disheveled, his hair a little mussed. He didn't look as polished as he usually did, but in that moment, he looked more real to Ioma than he had since they'd first met. How's the language going? Jin-ho asked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. His voice was low and casual, but there was a hint of concern beneath the question. Ioma smiled faintly, shrugging. It's getting there. Still not great, but I'm trying. That's all that matters, he said, his voice tinged with something almost affectionate. You'll get there. She glanced at him, meeting his eyes for a brief moment. She could see the sincerity in them, in everything he said. "What about you?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. "How do you manage it all? The company, the rumors, your life?" He was quiet for a moment, his gaze shifting to the city below, as if weighing his answer. When he spoke, his voice was uncharacteristically soft. "I don't always manage it well. I used to think that being in control, keeping people at a distance, would protect me from everything. But it hasn't. And now I realize that control isn't everything." He paused, turning his gaze back to her. "What about you, Ioma? What do you want?" She was taken aback by the question. It was something she had asked herself 1,000 times but had never been able to answer. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I knew what I wanted, but everything's changed since I came here. I didn't expect any of this. I didn't expect you." Jin Ho's lips curved into a small smile, but there was no mocking in it, just understanding. "I didn't expect you either," he said softly. "But here we are." Ioma's heart skipped a beat at his words. She wasn't sure what this was, what they were, but it was different. And for the first time, she allowed herself to let go of the fear, just a little. "Jin Ho," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm not asking for perfection. I'm not asking for some fairy tale. But what if we tried? What if we gave this a real chance?" His gaze locked onto hers, and for a long moment, he didn't speak. The silence between them was thick with the weight of what they were both considering. Finally, Jin Ho leaned forward, his expression serious, yet there was a softness in his eyes that Ioma hadn't seen before. "I'm willing to try," he said quietly. "For you. For us." The air seemed to shift around them, the weight of their unspoken promises settling in. In that moment, Ioma felt as though she had been holding her breath for far too long. She let it out, slowly, letting the tension slip from her shoulders. This wasn't a perfect story. They weren't a perfect couple. But they were real. They were trying. "I can't promise everything will be easy," she said softly, her eyes never leaving his. "But I can promise that I'm willing to try too." A small smile tugged at Jin Ho's lips, and for the first time, Ioma saw the man beneath the cold, businesslike exterior. The man who was just as lost and searching as she was. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said, his voice full of quiet determination. "One step at a time." They sat there for a while longer, the city lights twinkling in the distance, both of them lost in the comfort of the moment. Ioma had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was no longer alone in the world. Jin Ho's presence beside her was a steady, reassuring force. And that, for now, was enough. What do you think of their journey? Will Ioma and Jin Ho be able to build something real, or is the past too much to overcome? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.